Hello, lovelies, and welcome back to Squeaky's Cauldron, the podcast where I enter into this more intimate space with you here on my snuggly bed with my multicolored, oversized, stuffed unicorn Gerald, and you. Just me and your ear holes. So, today we are going to be talking about timeline jumping, but in the opposite direction. So I'll be covering a bit of a practice that I have for the new moons, as well as an experience that I had and an experience that a friend of mine relayed to me after I told her about this weird thing that happened while I was in the middle of this practice. So before we go any further, I do want to remind y'all that you should absolutely 1000% be on my newsletter list. It is squeakyscauldron.com/moon pages. Comes out every other week with moon stuff, so things for the new moon and for the full moon. And I'm aiming for sending out something a little more interesting, more story-driven, something I've been processing on the weeks that I don't send out the moon stuff. So again, that is squeakyscauldron.com/moon pages. Plus, you'll be able to keep up to date on all the cool stuff that's fit to dish, including updates to the next round of the Lilith Factor. So hurry on over there and get signed up. Alright, so on to our show. Timeline jumping. So like I said, we're going to start off with this practice because that is the foundation of this experience that I had. So a while back when I was in Cappadocia, I first encountered this kind of concept of fasting for the new moon. And I believe it was from a book called Glam, Glam. I can't remember the author's name right now. But he talks about working with dark goddesses, and I believe specifically Hecate, and this practice of fasting for 3 days around the moon. This also might have been from Courtney Weber's book on Hecate, actually. You know, you can look it up. Both books are interesting, so might as well check them out. The idea is that you take fasting time on the day before the new moon itself, and the day after the new moon. And you can fast from whatever you like. Maybe it's food, or social media, or tobacco, or sugar. For me, I like to fast from any kind of social media, from television, and I like to retreat quite a lot from my social engagements. The purpose of this is to open yourself up to having the space for messages to come through and for contemplation and really just going into the dark moon energy, which is dark, quiet, in the darkness, in the shadows, withdrawn, and allowing whatever things are there to percolate and peep their heads through and, express their voices, because often these things speak in voices that are quieter than we would normally be able to hear if we, watch a bunch of TV or doom scroll on Instagram, or both at the same time. Now, don't get me wrong, I do abstain from TV during my fasts, and a large reason for that is because I fucking love TV. I absolutely love it. Give me stories. I just love watching and listening to other people's stories, because this is the mythology for the modern age, is these stories that we see. And I can eat it up. If you get me three episodes into a season of something, just about anything, I will be like, I'm invested now. I gotta go. It's true for even 90 Day Fiancé, which is god awful trash. But I was like, yes, I'm invested. I want to see what happens here. So, and of course, I have a kind of personal relationship with the idea of dating someone from a different country than yours. So that probably had something to do with it. But yeah, actually, I was watching 90 Day Fiancé way before I met Haisum. I was prepping myself, apparently. So, yes, here I am fasting. Last week, I was fasting. The new moon was happening, and I chose to dedicate the 3 days of the fast to three different goddesses that I've been working with. So the first day was for Kali, the second day was for Hecate, and the third day was for Lilith. And I believe it was on the second day. I did tarot readings for the goddesses, and I, did a little bit of research on them and just kind of like stewed in the energy to just get it moving through me and get myself in that vibe. So yeah, I believe it was on the second day. And Hecate is, known for dream spaces and transition spaces and just that weird like in between. And so I was falling asleep that night and was in that weird in between. That space where you're half awake and half asleep and anything seems possible, but also like you're actually not really conscious. I believe it is alpha wave state for your brain. And this is such a potent space for magic and messages to come through. Like, there are different meditation techniques that you can utilize to get into this kind of brain state so that you're open to, let's say, to the other side, to the non-manifest, so that you can more easily access it and bring it through into the manifest world. So this was the state of mind that I was in. In that place, I found myself watching a version of myself in a kitchen, in some crappy apartment build out. Not crappy, but like not great either. Very, very cookie cutter kind of apartment. And I knew as I was seeing her, I somehow had the knowing that this is me in another timeline. Now, just a quick aside here, like, have you heard of timeline jumping? If you've been hanging out in the spiritual self-development world, you very well may have. It's this idea that you can align yourself with one of the billions of other timelines that exist. So, if you've watched Back to the Future, I want to say 3? Maybe it's in 1. Anyway, the idea that every choice that you make, every choice that everyone makes, creates a new timeline. And so these timelines are branching and branching and branching. So many of these timelines exist. And in some timeline, like, I never started smoking. So if I wanted to quit smoking, I could align myself with that timeline and then jump to that timeline. And then I would be a non-smoker. So the reason I bring that up is because my friend Tessa utilized that practice to quit smoking with zero cravings afterwards. And she said it felt like waking up from a dream. And the dream was the timeline where she smoked. And the waking up was, oh, no, actually, really, I'm a non-smoker. So I'd been thinking about like these kinds of concepts a bit because I had that conversation with her and a couple others relatively recently. So there I was watching this version of myself, this other timeline of myself. And she was standing on one side of a bar in a kitchen, and inside the kitchen itself was this guy wearing a baseball cap, like one of those kind of douchey, sporty baseball caps with the flat bill and the little silver sticker underneath. He was in the kitchen and he was just being a righteous asshole. Like, this guy was bad news. And I knew, like, that knowing that this was an abusive relationship. And I started, like, calling out to her. I said, "You don't have to be here. Why don't you come with me?" And I felt like I grabbed her, and then suddenly I was back in my bed here in Tucson. And I felt this energy enter in through my solar plexus and just kind of like wash from there out into the rest of my body. And I had, again, the knowing that I had rescued me from another timeline and brought her into this timeline. So normally, like I said, the way that this timeline jumping works is that you're moving from your timeline into a timeline that has something that you want in it, has a particular way of being that you want in it. This, though, is like, oh, actually, this timeline's pretty fucking rad. This version of me that exists in this other timeline, I want to help them and bring them into here and now so that they're experiencing something better than what it was that they were experiencing. And I've never heard of this before. I've never heard anyone talk about it, or like, even in theory. I've only heard the let's make our lives better kind of approach to it. And so I brought this to a friend of mine, to Roxy. Shout out Roxy. And told her about, what I had experienced, and then asked her, like, is this anything? Have you heard of this before? Was this just a weird experience that I had that has no basis for anything else? And she told me a story about a friend of hers. Now, this is, it's slightly different, but it has a lot of the same earmarks. So this guy had been going through life, very kind of arrogant guy, from what I understand, a bit misogynistic, just like not really the kind of dude that you'd maybe want to hang out with, but you've definitely met this kind of dude, I'm sure. And he wanted to change. He wanted a different kind of life, and I guess like he started meditating. In the midst of one of these meditations, he felt himself go into this point of time where, when he was a little boy, his parents divorced. When he was told that they were divorcing, it was in the laundry room of this house, and they'd put him on the dryer, the washing machine, set him there, and told him that they were getting a divorce. After the divorce, his parents both kind of abandoned him, and his grandparents raised him, from what I understand. So obviously, kind of a traumatic, original wounding event there. In this meditation that he said did not feel like a meditation, it felt like he was actually there, which is what I felt during my experience. Like I was no longer in the bed here in Tucson. I was in this apartment. So he's in this house, and his parents have just told him they're getting a divorce. And he walks into that room, into the laundry room, picks up the little boy, his little version of himself, and walks out. He described it the same way to Roxy. He said, I felt like I rescued myself. The experience was so vibrant and so very, very real. This man changed dramatically after that experience. He became much more open, much more kind, grounded, centered, all the good stuff that we're all kind of orienting towards. From this one encounter, this one place where he reached back into his past, into a different timeline, who knows, and rescued that little boy from what would come after that, I suppose. Like I don't understand the logic and the way everything works out exactly, but that's kind of what I gather from it, is now this little boy was safe and taken care of and loved, and instead of neglected and abandoned and shifted off to Grandma and Grandpa's house. So I don't know if this resonates for you at all, or if this is something that you've heard of. I would love to know. As I'm describing this experience of this guy, this feeling of like jumping out of his physical body and into something else, and my experience too, it reminds me of the meditation that I did in Cappadocia. That was right around the time of that very first new moon fast, where, well, if you've been listening to this for a while, you'll have heard this story. But essentially, like, Hecate grabbed me out of my body and took me to her garden and told me, after some other stuff had happened, told me that I needed to go to England. I clipped 3 holly leaves from a bush as I was on my way out of her garden and back to where I was, back to my cave in Cappadocia. And the holly leaves, I knew, signified something that I would get in touch with in England, and that they were all H's. They all had something to do with H. What ended up happening was I found Hisam in London. I connected with Heather, which led directly to me finding Hisam. I haven't told y'all much about Heather other than some vague allusions to this woman in Wales. I probably won't tell you much about Heather for a lot of reasons, but long story short, my experiences with her, I feel, were instrumental to me meeting Hisam, to me being where I am right now. And then I also had this renewed connection with a woman named Holly, who was part of the cult that I was part of in Peru, which led to then me unpacking more of that and actually, like, finally healing from this experience that happened 7-8 years ago, something like that. So yeah, it's that's not timeline jumping, I think, but there's a thread that goes through all of this, and it's this moving out of one's body into a different space, and in that space coming into contact / a kind of possession of some information or a part of oneself that needs resolution, that needs care, that needs something. So, have you done this? Have you heard of someone who's done this? I would really, really love to know, because, like I said, it's not something that I have found much information on, this timeline jumping in the other way. So if this has happened to you or someone that you know, please reach out. Send me an email at squeakiescauldron@gmail.com. You can find me on Instagram at Queen Sarah Evergreen. If you're watching this on YouTube, just go ahead and drop me a comment down below, and I see all of them. I may not be the speediest at replying to all of them, but I see you. I do. And I appreciate you commenting. I appreciate you listening. Thank you. And if you're listening to this on the podcast app, whatever podcast app, please do consider leaving a rating and a review if that's part of the app that you use. That'd be super cool. Love to, see how this is impacting y'all. And before I let you go, like, if this is the kind of territory that you want to start exploring for yourself, but you're not sure where to start, where to go, maybe you're scared, reach out to me. So I am finding a lot of joy in accompanying people in this process of opening up to their inherent magic, to their power, to all these crazy, wild things that we can do with ourselves and with the energy around us. So you can go to my website, squeakiescauldron.com, and look at what I've got up there. All right, my lovelies, until next time, take care of yourselves, and as always, use your voice.